there, sprinted up the trail. Somebody had probably been there.
Yeah.
And of course, there were like a million people up there. And there was a storm that was kind of passing through. And I noticed the way there was an opening in the clouds on the horizon that had a really good chance of kind of lighting it up from underneath. So I stuck around, even though it started raining. It chased away almost all the crowds, and sure enough, it lights up these clouds from underneath. And then I stuck around, and it started raining harder, and that chased almost everyone away except like about a dozen photography nerds like me. And there was lightning coming behind the arch, and I saw the way the clouds were moving, and I knew there was a chance that I could get some really cool lightning like right behind the arch. And
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
if you look at my website, I'm not trying to promote this. JaredWarrenPhotography.com. There's one that you see. It's actually like a 2-minute long exposure put together, and there's
Wow,
lightning bolts
strikes
behind the arch.
Cool.
And oh man, I was
We're
like,
waiting for
Is that the same
their
night?
client to come over. She's
What's that?
taking
Was that
over from
those
the
taken on the
GFSD.
same night?
yeah, same night. And so I'm kind of down further down in the bowl, trying not to roll off the cliff, because if you've been there, you know there's kind of a steep decline there. And
Here, I'll
it's,
show Jared this.
hey Michael,
Hey, Jared.
it's good to
Hold
see
on,
you.
I'm turning my camera around. Let's see.
He's got
You're
the,
blurred.
he's got the blur on.
I should have been in focus. I'm sorry. That doesn't. Are you trying to? Yeah, the photo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Which one is that? Can't tell.
Oh, that's
my light is dark. I haven't turned my lights on.
yeah.
I'm stuck in a chair with a surgically repaired ankle.
Oh,
Ooh.
Yeah, I had a little accident playing soccer a couple weeks ago, so I haven't turned my lights on, but it's over on the wall. It's a little tree down in the bowl.
Yeah, that's down in Grand Staircase.
Yeah.
Anyway, amazing night. My memory, I was there, I was kind of holding my hat over the lens to shield it from the rain coming down. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get struck by lightning because it was far enough in the background.
The way that my PDF is set up, I have attached on as an appendix the manuscript ready copy. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom, it's the bottom of the manuscript ready copy. So all the other appendices are somewhere between that and the. Does that make sense?
Well, I was looking after the references.
Yeah, so in the manuscript ready copy, I also have references on that, so you have to scroll to that's the last appendix. So it's really confusing. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you see references, but that's the references from the manuscript ready copy that's in the appendix. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
I'll go
So
with
just
it.
scroll up a little higher and you'll see the other appendices.
Okay, cool.
Hi, Dr. Coyne.
Hi,
You get the front of the table.
I guess.
So
Secret
lucky
English.
you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I read it as the Tanner Building.
Oh,
and
shoot,
anyway.
sorry.
Would someone mind catching?
I know the Taylor buildings
This
are
is
often.
farther,
She
yeah.
did a classic, go to the Tanner building.
Yeah, she
I
did.
classic
Oh,
went to the Tanner
That's
Building.
wrong on the campus.
Perfect there.
I know,
Okay, well, thanks for making the hike over here.
yeah, of course.
All right, I'll welcome everyone.
Great.
We are going to jump right in, and first just want to thank committee members for their participation in this process, and yeah, recognizing that Lauren has put in a ton of work, and others have put in good work to this as well, but obviously Lauren especially, and it's hard to do a randomized controlled trial for your dissertation. She did one for thesis and dissertation. So congratulations, very meaningful contribution. I've invited Lauren to have a presentation prepared that if she went through it uninterrupted, she'll probably get through in 20, 25 minutes. And we're gonna have, so we'll have a lot of time for discussion and question and answers. If you feel like you can save the question to the end, you can wait till then. If it's something that really needs to get resolved before we move forward, feel free to jump in. Solved. But yeah, most of this will just be discussion, question, answer, and Lauren's going to summarize mostly focusing on methods, results.
Perfect. Well, I was thinking I would stand, but now I'm thinking maybe I should sit so Michael can see me, and I also have a.
I'm
clicker.
okay. I got
Sure.
the slides.
Okay, great.
So
So I guess I'll just click on my, because usually there's like a clicker. That's okay. I'll just click through manually. Well, before I start, I just wanted to share a little bit about, obviously Jared mentioned I did a randomized controlled trial for my dissertation. But I just want to share that I'm honored to be able to present on the topic of self-compassion because it's been sort of not only an academic journey for me, but also a personal journey. I'm just, as I'm nearing the end of my doctoral studies, I'm thinking back to where I came from and that little nervous first year grad student that came in. I think I spent a lot of time in my first year just comparing myself to other people, like not feeling good enough, not feeling like I was doing enough and criticizing myself. And I just remember being so nervous and feeling like Dr. Warren was going to find out that he made such a big mistake taking me as a grad student. Actually, this is a funny story. I don't know if you remember this, but one of my very first meetings with Dr. Warren, we meet weekly. I was so nervous walking into his office that I tripped and I had a mug of water and I spilled 32 ounces of water all over his office, like his carpeted office floor. And I was like, oh, you're such an idiot. What are you doing? And so obviously that didn't help the negative self-talk. But what I will say is that over my time researching this topic and also working as a clinician with this topic, implementing these things in my own life, I've seen the improvements that I've had in my own well-being. And I'm feeling just as nervous right now, I think, as I was as that first year grad student, but bear with me as I start this presentation. So with that being said, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the big picture context of what we do in our research. So one of the things that drew me to working with Dr. Warren was the potential for impact of our research. Our mission is to disseminate evidence-based positive psychology resources to the greatest number of people that we possibly can. You know, there's a lot of great self-help resources out there, but what our goal was to specifically pair people with resources and interventions that we knew were evidence-based, that really had a basis, a solid grounding in the research for being effective and helpful at improving well-being. So the topic of self-compassion specifically, what we know from the broad literature on self-compassion is that by and large, self-compassion is associated with well-being. People who are self-compassionate, who are gentle with themselves, are generally happier people. And that extends to a couple different areas of well-being. It extends to psychological well-being, feelings of happiness and life satisfaction, social and even physiological well-being. People who are self-compassionate are better able to manage stress. They feel more satisfied in their relationships. And people who are self-compassionate feel better about themselves and their bodies. People who are able to be gentle with themselves feel have improved body image and lower levels of body dissatisfaction. So as far as the intervention world, the first most well-established interventions in self-compassion are, or I guess the ones that have the most evidence behind them, are group-based interventions that are clinician-led, usually over a series of weeks. Some notable ones are Paul Gilbert's Compassionate Mind Training, Chris Germer and Kristen Neff's Mindful Self-Compassion. Those are both group-based interventions. And there's some that are also more brief interventions, like Tara Brach's RAIN is just a one-time guided meditation that practices self-compassion. So more in our sphere of the online interventions, there are quite a few there is a number of self-compassion interventions that have come out, particularly in the last few years. However, many of these interventions are brief one-time interventions. So the researchers will have participants like complete a 20-minute self-compassionate letter and then examine their outcomes right after completing it, and they'll find, yay, they have a little boost in self-compassion. But there's not as much evidence to suggest that those effects hold up over time. Of the online interventions that have been done over time, there's lack of care for engagement and user experience. And there isn't a single one that sort of popped out as the gold standard. So with our resources, we, as Dr. Warren mentioned previously, my thesis was on a pilot study. So we had sort of this beta version of our self-compassion website. And let me just show you really quick what that looks like so you can get an idea. Is that right? So it's just a website that has information. So these first few tabs are psychoeducation on what self-compassion is, why it's important, how it's helpful. And then this part right here is our self-compassion strategies menu that basically just has outlined, these are different exercises you can do to practice self-compassion. So in our pilot study, we had people spend 3 weeks practicing using the exercises outlined in this module and reading through these resources, and examined how that affected the variables that we discussed previously. So self-compassion, well-being, and body dissatisfaction. So what we found was that it had significant effects on self-compassion, well-being, and body dissatisfaction. Woohoo! That's so exciting. That doesn't usually happen in research, but it did have significant effects on all of those. So along with that, we collected participant feedback, and participants expressed interest in having some more engaging content. So they really enjoyed the videos that we did have. So they expressed interest in having more videos, high quality content, recorded exercises instead of ones that they sort of just do in their own mind, as well as having a more expanded course that tracks their progress rather than just like the informational website that I showed you. So in the present study, oh, what happened? Sorry. Okay, so that brings us to the current study. With the feedback we collected from our pilot study, we scaled up our course. We decided that we're going to do a replication study with improvements. So first we wanted to improve the intervention, and second we want to improve methodology. So the feedback that I mentioned, having content improvements and having a full-length course I discussed already. The second part was methodological improvements. So with our first randomized controlled trial, we used a wait list rather than an active control group. Wait lists can artificially inflate effect sizes. So it's really just telling us, is the intervention more effective than doing nothing at all? But what we really want to know is that the actual self-compassion part of it, what's helpful. And so we chose to use an active control. And then the second part was we wanted to know, are these resources helpful for someone who's maybe not actually inclined toward or interested in self-compassion? So we recruited with neutral language to see if without even knowing if it's about self-compassion, would someone experience improvements in it to mitigate self-selection bias. So our hypotheses were, primary hypothesis was that people who use the self-compassion course would experience greater increases in self-compassion well-being and greater decreases in body dissatisfaction relative to our active control. And then with our secondary hypothesis was just kind of testing for a treatment dosage effect to see if within the treatment group, course usage, the amount that you use the course would predict how much you improve in the outcomes. Getting into method. So we recruited from February 2021 to May 2022, so a little over a year. Our recruitment was done primarily through social media, and we partnered with some organizations that sent out information or the flyer in their newsletters, but it was done all totally online, and also some snowball sampling, so participants would spread through word of mouth. We, as I mentioned previously, we recruited with neutral language, so we didn't mention self-compassion or what the subject of the course was, neither the treatment or the control. Well, I guess prior to randomization, no one knew that it was about self-compassion, and those who were in the control group didn't know that the treatment group was doing self-compassion and vice versa until after the fact. So we just recruited as a self-help or self-improvement study. When participants saw the flyer and were interested, they contacted researchers via email and asked to be included. And then they were sent a screening survey in consent form. Once they filled that out, within that survey, there was a random number generator that a participant ID number was generated to them, and then that assigned them to either the treatment or the control group, whether it was odd or even. So just simple randomization there. So our participants we had 216 participants. They were 81% female, 85.7% white. Average age was 27, and with a standard deviation of 11. As far as inclusion criteria, participants just had to be over 18. They had to be able to speak English. All the resources were in English, and they had to have access to internet and a computer. Because we're doing a randomized control trial, this is our consort flow chart. Consort is the official RCT reporting guidelines to just say where we lost participants. So originally we had 479 that were assessed for eligibility. 18 were excluded due to not meeting inclusion criteria, or they were obviously fraudulent, sent multiple emails sent from the same person. And then of those, 461 were randomized to one of the groups, 241 in intervention, 220 in control. As you can see, a significant portion were lost during the course of the study that didn't complete follow-up measures or were lost after being randomized to a group. So of those that were allocated to the intervention, more were lost in the control group once they found out that they were being assigned to do our control condition, which we'll talk about what that was, then with the self-compassion. So it appears that just knowing that it was a self-compassion course, people were more interested in staying in, but then a significant portion were lost throughout the course. In the final sample, 109 were from the treatment group were included in analyses, and 107 from the control group. Okay, so let's talk about our measures. So our three variables are self-compassion, well-being, and body dissatisfaction. Those are our outcome variables. We did use a number of different measures. For self-compassion, we used our original self-compassion measure that we've been spending some time validating. It is just a general unidimensional measure. And then we also used Neff's self-compassion scale, which breaks it down into 3 subscales. So we use the subscale measures of that, and then the total score of our measure, just so we can have a little more information about the areas of self-compassion that they were improving in. But I won't go into too much detail with that. As far as well-being, we measured subjective well-being, life satisfaction, and then positive and negative affect. So just a little bit about the well-being literature. As far as conceptualization of well-being, many studies that are currently existing have conceptualized well-being as sort of a combination of life satisfaction. How satisfied does someone feel with their life? Do they feel like they're living a good life? And then that combined with their level of positive and negative affect. How frequently are they experiencing positive versus negative emotions? There's some back and forth in the research world about what is the most comprehensive, content valid conceptualization. We would argue that that's a little limited in scope, especially in the positive psychology world. We really focus on things beyond life satisfaction and affect to include things like relationship satisfaction, fulfillment, a feeling of purpose. Is my life full of meaning? So our original survey on flourishing was meant to capture some of those other areas that aren't found in just life satisfaction and affect. So all 3, those are our well-being measures. And then the last one was our sort of secondary measure looking at body dissatisfaction. We used the short form of the body shapes questionnaire to assess how dissatisfied people felt with their bodies. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the interventions we used. So I'm just going to give you a little preview of, I just lost my. Let me click on this one. Okay, so this is what the course looks like. This is the homepage, as you can see. I can't see this on my window. Okay, so for the first little bit of the course, they go through, they have a workbook companion that goes along with the course where they do writing exercises. They'll learn about how to make the most of the course, and they take a baseline, their baseline measures here. And then after that introduction, the first content portion of the course is the fundamentals of self-compassion. So this is mostly, these are all videos that are sort of some psycho ed. I'll just give you like a 10-second little preview of what this looks like. Stay tuned.
So what is self-compassion? A nice simple definition of self-compassion is treating yourself with the same kindness and concern that you would give to a good friend in need. When you're in a tough situation, you've fallen short of your own expectations, it's responding from a place of kindness instead of harsh criticism. It's like emotional first aid when you're having a hard time. To understand self-compassion, it's helpful to know that the Latin roots of the word compassion mean to suffer with. When you have compassion for someone, you suffer with them. You're there for them. You do your best to help them get through the challenge they're facing. So with self-compassion, it just means you're there for yourself. Count on being a friend to yourself instead of acting like an enemy, which sadly is what happens sometimes. In fact, let's imagine two friends named Taylor and Alex. And Taylor tells Alex that her boyfriend just broke up. Taylor is hurting. What did she mean? What if Alex said to her, "Wow, you're such a loser. You were only with him for 2 weeks. You probably started realizing what a mess you are. You should go binge watch Netflix by yourself." Ouch, that would be pretty harsh, right? The problem is that our own minds will often throw out those same kinds of harsh criticisms of ourselves. And if we're not aware of what's going on, it's easy to start believing those unhelpful thoughts.
Okay, that's just a little sneak peek. So this is the sort of psycho-ed portion. We're just learning about self-compassion, what it is, why it's helpful, and then we move into this.
You gotta hire that guy.
Right? And then we moved into the practice of self-compassion, which is all guided practices, writing exercises, and a number of sort of imaginal thought experiment exercises. So there are all these audio recordings. You go through each of these exercises. Over the course of 30 days, we have some bonus exercises and then the completion. So that's a little bit of what that one looks like. And now let me show you really quick here the expressive writing. So the expressive writing course was based off of Pennebaker's expressive writing paradigm, which has been shown in previous research to have modest therapeutic effects on things like psychological symptoms, symptom distress. So we wanted something that would have that. We're sort of not comparing it to nothing. We're comparing it to something that we know has modest therapeutic effects and see how does our intervention measure up. Just to add a little bit of rigor from our previous study. So this is just sort of mirrors that, where it tells them about expressive writing, why it's helpful. The videos are not as well curated because I made this myself. And then they have a prompt each day that says, write about X emotion or something that's emotionally relevant to you right now. So that's kind of what that looks like. Moving back, let's see if I can. Go back to my-
Quick question for the people
Yeah.
that did the expressive writing and wanted to do the other one. Did you let them go back later?
Yep, so they were granted access afterwards. Okay. So moving on to results. Okay, so first thing we did was clean data, prepared it, scraped for outliers. All outliers were fenced to plus or minus 2 interquartile ranges from the median. Baseline t-tests were performed just to make sure that randomization was effective. So we compared demographic variables as well as baseline measures, and there were no significant differences on any of the demographic variables or baseline measures of well-being, self-compassion, or body satisfaction.
Really quickly with that fencing, did you get rid of the values or did you change the values?
We fenced them down to
So you made them at the
2 interquartile
like
ranges
say
above the
2
median.
standard deviations above, you put
Correct.
them at that level.
The other thing we did at baseline was we just wanted to ensure that it's what we're wanting to look at is a truly non-clinical general population sample. So we did baseline t-tests to compare our baseline mean to normative data of symptom distress from a large general population sample. So we took data from a national health interview survey and compared symptom distress, and it was essentially equivalent. And then as far as our outcome analyses, we used seemingly unrelated regression. So the reason we use that SUREG is the short form for that, instead of ordinary least squares regression, is just because we did have multiple comparisons, because we had so many measures that I showed you before. To correct for the multiple comparison problem, SUREG allows you to run all of your regression models at the same time, assuming correlation between your error terms, which OLS does not do. So we did that, and then we also used Cohen's d effect sizes at post-test. So post-test measures between treatment and control took Cohen's d effect sizes. So here's our outcomes. In these first two columns, we have our post-test scores for both groups. Our self-compassion, GSC is the self-compassion course, DW is expressive writing. And then this is our regression beta coefficient. So if it's a star, that means it's significant at the 0.05 level. If it's double star, that means it was significant at the 0.01 level. Actually, I think 0.001 level. So I sort of, just to simplify, just took the beta coefficient from our course condition. So this is the course condition predicting outcome. So there was a significant effect between group on subjective well-being, all our self-compassion variables. So as you'll remember, we have our self-compassion total score, and then our subscale scores of self-kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity. All of those were very significant, as you would expect, because what they're working on is self-compassion. And there was an effect on subjective well-being as well from the regression models. There was no significant effect on life satisfaction, positive or negative affect, or body dissatisfaction from these models. The other thing we did was the Cohen's d effect sizes. So on self-compassion, it was about a medium effect size. As you'll notice, the effect size on subjective well-being would have been small, but you'll notice that the effect size was within the range of error with the confidence interval. So some mixed results there, because it was, the beta coefficient was significant on our regression model. However, the post-test between group effect size was within that range of error. So moving on to our secondary model, our second question was, does the amount of usage of the course effect have a dosage response relationship? So the two usage variables we're looking at was the total practice minutes and then the percentage of the course that was completed. So between these two, specifically looking at total practice minutes, we found that there was a slight effect of practice minutes on improvements in self-compassion. There was no effect of either of these variables on well-being or body dissatisfaction, but there was an effect of practice minutes. So the more you practice, the more time you spend on it, there's a slight improvement in how much you improve in well-being or in self-compassion. Then with our other variable, the percentage of the course that they completed, there was no significant relationship on any of the variables, but what you'll notice is you'll see these variables stacked at the end. So that kind of tells us that once people started, they had a pretty high likelihood of completing the course, which does restrict our range as well as the predictive power of that as a variable. And moving into discussion. So general takeaways. As far as our primary outcomes, there was mixed results. There were apparent improvements in self-compassion and possibly well-being, but there was no effect for body dissatisfaction, affect, or life satisfaction. As far as our usage outcomes, of those who did the self-compassion course, there was an effect of the amount of time they spent predicted on their improvements in self-compassion. As far as engagement, there was a high level of attrition. So after randomization, 54.8% of participants dropped out. This is from the treatment group. So this is a common problem in internet dissemination of interventions. There's documented, many studies have attrition rates as high as 80 to 90%. It's something that online interventions is a great idea to be able to reach a lot of people that wouldn't normally be able to access it. One of the things that we do need to work on is how to increase engagement. So I'll get ahead of myself and before I get to future directions. But let's first just talk about some of the strengths. So one strength is just the fact that it was a conceptual replication. As we know, in our beautiful social sciences, we are in the midst of a dirty replication crisis. And so the more replication we have, the better. The more we can trust these interventions that we have. So just the act of replicating using a more rigorous design, it does make sense that we found more modest treatment effects. That is what we would have expected comparing it to another therapeutic intervention rather than comparing it to nothing. Another strength was just our efforts to minimize selection bias to say, hey, like this looks like it works, and it works even in people who weren't specifically seeking out to work on self-compassion. We use an active control, right? Rather than using our wait list, we used the expressive writing that I mentioned. And then the other part is just that it was naturalistic. Even with our previous pilot study, there was quite a bit more oversight. We had like shared Google spreadsheets that they were tracking all their minutes on, and they knew that we could see them. So there was a much higher level of adherence in our original study. There was like 80 to 90% adherence, which is pretty much unheard of in internet research. And our attrition rates were pretty well within the normal range of internet intervention attrition. As far as demographics, limitations, unbalanced demographics. So our population, or our sample was heavily female and heavily white. So that does have some implications as far as generalizability and who these effects would generalize to. There's some challenges with online recruitment as far as anonymity. I know we discussed this in the prospectus defense, and indeed there are at times people will be sending you multiple emails that are worded the same or seem spammy, and so that was something that was just added error, but we did our best. We did add additional measures to be able to screen those out. In Qualtrics, you can see IP addresses, and so that's one way to weed those out, and we're able to weed some of those out. And then attrition, again, that's just sort of the par for the course in online intervention dissemination. There was a significant level of attrition in our study. So as far as future directions, that's definitely something we want to address, is how to get people more engaged. So just broad dissemination models. One option that could be interested is using courses like these, integrating them as additions to therapy treatment, as additions to like employer health plans, using incentives, employer health plan incentives to get people to actually complete it so that they stay engaged. Those are just a couple options. So using other kinds of external reinforcers beyond just the benefits that are associated with well-being to help incentivize people. That's definitely an area of research where we have room to grow, to see how can we get people to be more engaged in online interventions. And then as far as this intervention itself within the broader context of self-compassion research, it definitely adds to it. We went to great efforts to make the intervention engaging and enjoyable, and so gives people just another option of something that they might enjoy to be able to complete as a self-compassion intervention that is quite accessible to people. Definitely, we want to continue with replication and have these results replicated by independent researchers. Obviously, all the research that's been done on it is by us. So that's sort of where we're headed and where we're looking at to be able to, as we sort of hearkening back, to be able to impact as many people as we possibly can. Thank you. I am turning it over now to the committee for any questions you have.
Good job. I have two questions. one might be a little bit more towards Jared at first, is for this type of online thing, do people typically pay like something? I mean, I'm just wondering, for an online, well-developed course, you might have some fee to do it. The reason I'm asking that is because you have a huge drop-off at the very beginning of people say they will do it, and then like 60, 70 people dropping immediately, they don't get from A to B, so to speak. So I'm wondering if even if it was just like $5, you might have gotten people more that they would have committed to it. I'm just kind of wondering, what do you think people might pay for a month course that's well developed?
Yeah, so because I've spent some time, just learning what these courses are like and what other people do, I'm aware that actually it's also the case that when people even pay for an online course, a lot of people don't even do it.
So they give their money
They
and
had,
they still
they had a
don't do
good
it.
idea and they paid some money to get in the course, but most people don't actually finish the courses they buy online.
Okay.
But there's some variability because we have a lot of resources that are just free online. Yeah, I know there's kind of some variety out there. So I think it's pretty typical for people not to complete it. But it's actually interesting that quite so many did once they got into it. And it's interesting to go through that consort diagram and sort of hypothesize, okay, why did 60 some people, when they found out what they were doing, decided not to continue? We can hypothesize, but it's pretty typical for people not to finish what they start.
Yeah. I was worried, if I was thinking, if I put money into something, I'm like, well, I'm going to commit to it versus I might have clicked on something out of curiosity, but my commitment wasn't very high. It was just more curiosity. The other question I had was, if you can remind me, how was the advertising done to get clients? What did that say?
Yeah, so we had a flyer that said, join a 30-day.
I was trying to get at this 81% women thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean,
So what did that say, the recruitment pitch?
it said, it essentially just said, join a 30-day self-improvement course.
Didn't
it was
mention
pretty-
body dissatisfaction in the, so I was wondering if it had said that explicitly, then maybe guys might have been less interested.
Yeah, we didn't, we were pretty vague about recruitment, so it just ended up probably. Yeah, so there was, sorry, I forgot that part, but they got a $50 Amazon gift card for the 30 days. And that was prorated depending on how much.
So there's still money they were losing that didn't finish it. So there's no explanation there for why. And the recruitment channels with the newsletters, those weren't somehow
Yeah,
geared towards women in any way.
no,
I'm just curious how.
yeah, I really, I've thought, I mean, I know that research is typically higher proportion female. It is higher than even what you would usually see.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just kind of how it ended up. So it was a lot of university recruitment, like online Facebook pages. So it could be spheres that are more female dominated. Some like community Facebook pages. So those were just sort of the population that we were recruiting to. But yeah, it was obviously unintentional, heavily female dominated.
If you did this study again, is there anything you might try to
Mitigate that.
mitigate that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Well, I think I don't know. I have to come back to that one. As far as sorry.
What did we just go on? Okay. Other people.
I'm curious, is there generally a gender difference?
I'm not totally sure.
Can you repeat that question?
She asked if there's a gender difference on self-compassion. As far as interest, it usually is typically higher women interest. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to use. I'd have to double check on that one. My instinct says yes, that there is a gender difference, but I don't.
Did you put, is it in the table? Did you break that table down by gender?
In the document, yes. Not in the slide.
And Lauren, I've forgotten if the 81%, those are that's the final sample.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah, that could be
conceivably,
also part
you
of it.
could have had predominantly more males drop out
Right.
once they saw, oh, it's either self-compassion or expressive writing.
Right, or even just completing the course. Because as I mentioned, there is higher interest in female populations. So if it's more interest in the female population, they're gonna be the ones sticking with it longer, because that's the percentage of people who completed.
And refresh my memory, you did include gender in the analysis,
I
right?
did,
There
yeah.
wasn't a significant difference in outcome. Gender?
There actually was on one of the variables, and I need to pull up which one it is, actually. I want to say, is it table 5? Yeah, well-being and life satisfaction. So there was people who used the course increased, females who used the course increased in well-being and life satisfaction more than males did. So,
But what was the baseline?
what was the baseline like? mean?
Yeah, were females lower on something?
No, all the baselines were equivalent. So yeah, for whatever reason. So I mean, yeah, it could be, and I talked about this in my manuscript a little bit. It could be that it just felt more impactful for females. It had like the concepts landed more, and so it affected well-being more for female participants. That is an interesting observation as well.
I have a technical question just about the active control, just thinking Georgia publication.
Yeah.
And it wasn't clear from reading the document, the adaptations to the original journaling component, did you guys do those or people use those adaptations? Past, basically,
Yeah.
you had to get 30 days out of it, right?
Right, yeah, so the original paradigm is a 3-day exercise. So we expanded it to 30 days, but we modeled it after another self-compassion RCT, or it might have been a mindfulness RCT, I can't remember, but there was another study that did something similar where they expanded it out into the 30 days. So we sort of modeled it after that. But we made some adaptations just to make it as parallel to our course as possible. So it wasn't an exact replication of that, because we did have like the psychoid portion.
Just looking at publishing this.
Yeah.
That's a potential weak spot that viewers will look after, because you say you're comparing it to an active control, but you are, but it's less validated active control. And so I think you're gonna have to focus on the pre-post for your treatment group, which is good, and you focus on that in comparison with RCT. But you're gonna have to be humble in that active comparison, just because that wasn't as well. Things, and I will present data. I can't remember who you mentioned. How well did people improve with the
They had significant improvements as well. So as far as like the well-being outcomes, they were pretty neck and neck. They both, there was no like the effect sizes at post were not different. So we would assume that they had similar improvements.
Right, I think you need to highlight the good that you're active.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And we did just a touch better with that. Self-compassion.
Great, thank you. That's good feedback.
Did you, sorry, did you turn in a publication ready manuscript?
Yes, it's the last appendix in my document.
Oh, I did. Okay.
Yeah, it's confusing because you scroll to the bottom, it just looks like it's my references, but it's the whole.
Yeah, I stopped it. Okay. Good, so get it out.
Okay, yeah, definitely. do a great job. Like, this is a tremendous amount of work over the last couple of years, and you've done such a great job writing it up and writing stats and like, all of the things. So, just so impressed. I think I have three things. So the first one is I'm wondering if you looked at any moderation. I'm kind of stuck on that body image finding.
Yeah.
Like nothing, right? Whereas other studies have shown that it does impact.
Yeah.
Fit for good. I'm wondering if you may have looked at it like, I guess I'm wondering, who do you think this would impact the most?
Yeah.
Because I suspect it's not going to universally impact everyone the same. That's kind of how you set up the results,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I think that you make a great point. So most of the self-compassion studies that have been previously done on body satisfaction have been in clinical samples. We happened to find an effect in our previous one with the wait list, that there was an effect, but not this one in the general population sample. So it does lead me to wonder, like, maybe this is more helpful for clinical samples, even though our big picture with well-being and looking at general, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be helpful for people with clinical concerns. So that's kind of my first thought. As far as the moderation, I thought about it, but I didn't. I worried about like feeling like I was p-hacking a little bit, so I didn't do that just because I didn't talk about it in my prospectus. But it's certainly a question that I don't know. I guess that's something I probably should have consulted on more, because I don't necessarily know if that counts as it just wasn't in my analytics plan. But I think it's a really interesting follow-up question to see, like, what if that is the case, that maybe for, I don't know, certain age groups or certain racial groups, there is an interaction or moderating effect.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'd be p-hacking at all. I would like,
Yeah.
my notes, I'm like, this is screaming for moderation.
Yeah.
But I might expect, even in a non-clinical sample, you're gonna have such a range.
Yeah.
You're gonna have some women that and men feel awesome about their bodies,
Right.
and then some who feel less, right?
Yeah.
And some people who are really good at self-compassion already, and some people who are really bad at it.
Yeah.
And so you might expect that the intervention would have the greatest effects for those in kind of that lower category.
Yeah, absolutely. So people that are lower in the body satisfaction or lower in self-compassion at baseline. Yeah.
Mhm. So I'll leave that up to Jared, whether he wants
Yeah,
to.
absolutely. No, I
actually
think that's
explore that.
I hesitated to do it for the dissertation, but I think it's an interesting question, is to explore and add into the manuscript.
Because in the discussion, you're like, well, maybe it's just good for clinical samples, and then like, what's the point then of having an online intervention available for everyone, right?
Yeah.
So that was my major thought there.
I agree, that would be a strong addition, trying to say, how are we gonna get this thing published?
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, and I also wasn't sure, like, if you just controlled for gender, or if you're actually moderated.
Just
right?
control. Yeah, I didn't do any
Okay, the way
moderation.
you talked about it, it sounds like you moderated for gender.
Okay, that was my
No,
mistake.
it's okay, it's okay. So I was like, wait a second, I didn't understand moderation.
Yeah.
So I would moderate by gender.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah, you're right. Because I said for people who,
Uh-huh.
for women, that's not the case. It was just a significant
Gender difference. in
gender
those
difference.
outcomes.
in those outcomes.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd look at it by gender and then look at like prior levels.
Right.
Just to see if that. Yeah, and I think that you can make a very strong theoretical case for that. It's definitely not just,
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. This is a more broad comment for the discussion. I think, so I was like so happy with everything until I got to the discussion, and I felt like I was looking for something more. Right now, there's a huge focus on like the strengths of the study, the weaknesses of the study, the future, like future research. It's kind of a smaller section on what the results actually mean. And like, what are the implications? Like, what's your vision for this? What do you hope happens, and how is this going to impact real people and real families and real clinics and all of that? And so you get into that a little bit in future research, like, well, we need to look at how this might. I'm just curious, like, you've done something phenomenal, like something really, really impressive. these are the implications of real people, like a person who'd be sitting here who's struggling in life.
Yeah.
That, I didn't get that feel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what I wanted more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, thank you for bringing that up. Because I think like that vision is the most important part of this research. Like, the impact, the fact that, you know, any person who, I mean, first of all, just getting the word out about self-compassion. I think that that's definitely happened in recent years. More people are talking about self-compassion than they ever have before, and that it's something that can be worked on and something that can be helped, but that they would know where to go. That this is like figuring out how can we get the word out? How can we disseminate this in ways that not only is it accessible, but that people actually know about it. So finding, you know, continuing to sort of publicize these resources just so that they are widely available. Yeah, like something that's, you know, general population sample, that's representative of everyone. That's the whole world. That's not narrowed down to anyone. So just figuring out, I think the future moving forward is figuring out how can we get this actually into people's hands, rather than it just being, they only heard about it because of a research flyer. How can we get people to know that it exists and that this is where they can go for like true evidence-based, research-backed strategies. So I think, you know, what that could look like is our research team has social media presence, and increasing that following so people know, you know, when you have a friend who's struggling, you can refer them, hey, I follow this account that's researchers who study this exact thing, and they can be directed to these resources. And that's sort of the direction that we're headed in and where we want to continue, just to maximize that reach.
Yeah, I love that.
Jared, who else is using your program, your platform now?
You mean for research or otherwise, or both?
Yeah, both.
Becky Lundwall is using us with some of her research. We've kind of just opened it up also to all BYU students and staff. So like hundreds of BYU people are going through it. Yeah, so potentially more than that. We're kind of focused on the research angle right now.
Okay, and then I've just got two more things. And this just struck me as I was listening to your presentation. So your function of usage, and was it like when they dropped out of this study, what did you call that?
Attrition? Or so like the usage minutes and the percent course.
Percent course completion.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, so like, I know for percent course completion, there wasn't really an effect because you had kind of a, yes. And then there was just a real small effect for function of usage. I think like 0.01 beta.
Yeah.
On one measure, right? So what is that?
Yeah, I think in some ways that's an encouraging finding, because it's, you know, I part of me is interested to see like what is the smallest dosage, like maybe what would it look like using these resources for 2 weeks? How long does it take for people to expect results? My only hesitation with that is we didn't have a 3-month follow-up to see what would that look like over a certain period of time. So I think it does definitely introduce an interesting question, like what's the minimum effective dose? But I also want to know what's the minimum effective dose that's going to actually hold over an extended period of time and really make their life better.
I'd love you to like dive
Yeah.
into that.
Okay, that's great.
Just a little bit more, because you're right. Like I you know, thinking about your percent completed, and there's one person, you know, that had like 0.2. Are they having the same effect as the people that spent all 30 days?
Yeah.
And then in that case, could you reduce the course to have the same impact? And then your overall attrition, like you were getting into, might be much lower.
Yeah.
Because it is a big ask. Like
Absolutely.
every day for 30
Yeah.
days, like I would have dropped out. I would not be in your study, right? Like as much as I want to increase my self-compassion, like that's a big ask. And so those are just some things that we're going through.
And going off that really quick with the moderator too, of maybe some people are coming in already high in well-being, because like that point, there's some people up there that dropped out early, but were already, their well-being looked really high. So it might be a moderator question of, you know, people that aren't doing very well versus doing well. That, you know, maybe we don't expect much. If you're already doing really well, maybe we don't expect much for the course to do for you, really, because you don't need it. At least according to, if your self-report's accurate.
Sure. Yeah. And that's sort of zooming out a little bit of big picture. Our vision is that, so we have self-compassion is just one of the topics or areas of growth and development that we have in our positive psychology. So we have this broad website with a number of different interventions, and self-compassion is just one of them. Ideally, we have a tool that participants complete the tool, and it basically tells them, you know, based on what you want to work on and where you stand normatively and how correlated this is with well-being, you should work on, you know, gratitude and self-compassion and whatever topic, right? So that's part of it. So I definitely agree, and that's sort of the other part of our big picture is that self-compassion is just a piece of the puzzle, and we want this to be paired with people who that's the thing they need to work on, versus people who need to work on things like relationship quality or gratitude or whatever it may be.
Yeah, just one last slide, catching on to this moderator idea, just thinking of, again, I'm sorry, I'm just beating this drum, but people that come in really high, you've got a ceiling effect, right? They can't get any better, whereas you probably didn't expect them to. Whereas I'd just be curious, you can maybe have as a post hoc analysis or follow-up analysis of people that actually meet some level of distress. Was it the K6 or something else, that people that meet criteria versus those that don't?
Yeah.
Does it help?
Yeah, and we had several like pretty significant outliers on distress and well-being that I think would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, it just kind of reinforces the fact that, I mean, this was pretty rigorous in terms of expecting a significant outcome, because you're not working with a clinical population. You're working with people that are, in theory, already starting out okay. And it's not like, you know, someone's like, oh, I feel depressed, I'm gonna go find some resources on depression. I'm interested in self-compassion, I'm gonna learn about it. Like we were just picking people, in theory, just from the general population and seeing if a self-compassion intervention would be helpful for them above and beyond an already studied control intervention. So like practically everything you could do to try to make yourself not have significant results is in there. But that to me is encouraging that, you know, that potentially there is something in this for anyone. That would be cool.
Oh, and Patrick, I have an answer to your previous question.
Okay.
So something that I remembered in our recruitment, I have a list of all the places that we recruited in. I can even pull that up really quick. Sarah, do you see my spreadsheet? No, I didn't copy the color coding. When I worked as her undergrad RA and on one of your studies, I just copied the exact format of how you kept track of all your participants. So thank you. It was very organized. Or whichever graduate student came up with that. Okay, so these are all the Facebook groups, but I know that a significant.
Are you looking at something? Or?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. It's on my screen. Okay, so these are.
Sort of online places.
Yeah, online, lots of Facebook groups. SVUs, student organizations.
This is everywhere you recruited?
Yeah, mostly. There might be some here or there
This is
that
so
are
many.
shut down. Well, like we have a women's organization here, and I remember that I know we sent it to like BYU Women Services and Resources, and a significant portion or a good number of them came from like BYU Psych Association, which is going to be more heavily female. So I mean, there's definitely, I think as far as improving in the future would be, you know, if I'm not just recruiting from like psychological organizations where things are more
So they're
heavily
online
female.
places. You think you find more guys? I'm trying to think of what that would be. Where do you guys hang out online?
Reddit.
St. George odd jobs and gigs.
Oh my gosh.
You just hang out in sports
St.
bars.
George, I've got jobs and gigs now.
But Lauren, at what point did you get demographic information? It was pretty early in that
Yeah.
counselor process, right? So like you could go back and see if a disproportionate number of males dropped out once they
Right.
saw what they were about to
Yeah.
be asked.
Yeah,
to
that's
do.
definitely something that would be interesting.
So
to
it
look
may
at.
not just be recruitment, it could have been differential
Right.
interest in.
It's very organized.
Okay, are there other questions from committee members we haven't?
My last thing is that I just think it needs a stronger conclusion. Right now, you can talk about future research. Should always, like, that should be your PowerPoint. This is what I did, this is why it matters. Yeah.
Perfect. That's great feedback. Thank you, everyone.
We have a few minutes if the guests have any questions. Open to that as well.
I'm just interested, there's a lot of talk about moderation versus controlling for certain variables. What's the difference there between those two?
Yeah, so moderation is saying, I'll say controlling for. It's controlling for is saying, I included it in my regression model that's saying, even after I accounted for differences in whatever it is, sex or race, these effects were still found. Moderation is saying, okay, let's dive in a little bit deeper and see, was there a difference in baseline levels? So was there like level of self-compassion at baseline? Like if they had a high level at baseline, did that impact how much they improved in this outcome? So it's saying for different levels of your whatever variable did that affect the relationship between the two? So I'm showing you. Yeah. Does that make sense? Did I explain that in a user-friendly way?
Who are all these people?
This is my family.
I'm guessing.
This is my dad
Yeah.
and my sister, Alyssa, and then I have in-laws here, my mother-in-law, Sally, and sister-in-laws, Ethan and Nancy, and that's my husband, Johnny. And then I've got a party.
Yeah, we
My
got a
mom's
whole
there,
lot.
I don't know who else is in
Thanks
there, to be honest. But yeah.
I can't see them. I can only see you.
Oh, here you go. Here you go. There's all my friends.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Michael. I miss you here. You should move back.
He's in Georgia, where I'm about to move to in a week and a half.
Oh,
so
cool. Is that where you're going?
for internship, yeah.
Where's your site again?
Yeah,
It's AU and the Medical College of Georgia and the VA in Augusta, Georgia.
Cool.
Yeah.
you'll be, an hour. Never been to Augusta.
Yeah, it's like 2 hours. I just went out about a month ago.
It's cool, but not cool because you're
So
gonna
you
be
flew into Atlanta?
so much.
Yeah, I flew into
humidity.
Atlanta. Very humid, I'm sure. How are you doing with the heat, Michael?
Today is 93 degrees and 56% humidity. We had to
Beautiful.
keep our kids in from playground time or releasing them at their playground. First day today.
Oh, nice.
And preschool teachers are like, should we take the kids out? I'm like, that's a little more.
Michael, is that a autism research institute? Did I say
Yeah,
that?
at Emory University.
At Emory University. I just wasn't sure. I know it's like a research institute, but I don't know if it's more.
Yeah. I'm in the school medicine.
Okay, so our committee is gonna chat for a little bit, so we'll excuse Lauren and guests.
Did you pause the recording?
I'll just take it out.
And we're we find you.
I'll just be waiting
We'll
outside.
just outside.
Shaking in my boots.
I'm just, yeah. we're good.
Okay, Lauren, I get to be the first to congratulate you, passing the event. Congratulations. I wish at this point there were like streamers that came out. I mean, there ought to be something like that, and we haven't set that up.
Streamers is my.
So there'll be just some minor revisions that we talked about and suggestions that I've taken notes on that I can share with you, but really, really impressive work, a huge project, and you made a really valuable contribution. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Now we can clap.
Say that again,
Yeah.
Michael.
I put streamers on my.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
good.
Well, I just want to finish by saying thank you to the committee and for all of your help. It's seriously invaluable feedback. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you, especially to Jared for all the guidance all these years. And also thank you to my family and for Johnny, especially because the last 2 months I've been pretty absent from the kids' life. But, so thank you to you, Johnny, and everyone who supported me, all my family.
And welcome to Georgia and the Linfords.
Thank you.
I looked it up, medical college is it's 2.5 hours from our house.
Awesome. We're
I
excited.
will say that if ever you're coming to Atlanta, we have a pretty nice Airbnb suite that we would save for you for super cheap. Just have to let us know when you're coming because it gets booked out really far.
Nice.
We'll be there.
And it's nice, it's big. We even have a Graco pack and play for little ones. We have beds for kids. So
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
so just last thing, committee members, you remember now we go into the grad prog system online, and there will be a button that you push that says she's passed. Okay, so yeah.
what if I hit the wrong button?
Don't do that.
Please don't all have to restart the whole thing.
So yeah, go in and check that box online, and I think that'll be good.
It's so fun to watch you go from like baby.
Thank you.
I was trying to, when were you in my lap?
I would have been
17.
16 or 17. Got to give lots of surveys in Spanish at people's houses.
Oh, you did?
That
Well, thanks.
was fun.
Are you the one, you do the superhero study? Okay, yeah, I remember that. That's cool.
Just barely, today it actually came out, published a follow-up from that superhero study. It's like a 5-year follow-up. Showing all sorts of. Yes. Okay. You guys
Okay,
can start talking now.
Cool. Well,
thanks,
and
Michael.
I'll end
All right,
this.
see you later.
Oh.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
So I don't need to get like something in the mail, like